Welcome back, everyone, to the R2Kast, R2Kast number 5 today. Today we've got a researcher, and a researcher that I know quite well. Today we've got Jessica Ireland-Hughes, who, for followers of the Rural to Kitchen page on Facebook and Instagram, will know as my girlfriend, my better half, some of you might say. So yeah, if you want to say hi, Jessica.
Hello.
It's actually quite weird saying Jessica. I mean, I call her Jess all the time. I don't know why I said Jessica. I just tried to be professional. But before we get into the podcast today, guys, I actually recorded 2 weeks ago's today as well as this one, so I had to change my clothes and actually pretend I wash from time to time. But it's all a facade. I don't actually wash that much and change my clothes as much with working from home. But if I could just ask you guys, I don't know if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are, like, comment, subscribe, get involved. If you're seeing it through the link on Facebook and Instagram, do the same, follow and like the page there. And maybe if you listen to your podcasts, I certainly know I'm not someone who watches much podcasts. I'm more of a sort of put my headphones on and go a walk, pretending I actually go a walk, but that sort of thing's more where I do it. So it's available on Spotify, it's available on Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Breaker, I'm missing one, Radio Public, all of which the links will be down below. But that's enough of me rambling on. We'll get into sort of Jess's story. So before we get into what you're actually doing, Jess, what your job is at the minute, and what your sort of aspirations are and whatnot, who is Jess Ireland-Hughes? Where did you come from? What's your sort of story?
Okay, so I am Jessica, and I am from Dumfries and Galloway, a little village just kind of near Thornhill, and I'm not from a farm or anything. I've not really got much ties to the countryside other than kind of field sports and things, and I went to the Barony College and did a NC qualification in animal nursing assistance, and I was kind of aiming to become a vet nurse at the time, but science really interested me, and there were a couple of classes where we were looking at things under the microscope, so that kind of led me to going down more of a sciencey route, and I went to the Riverside campus, the SRUC Riverside campus, to do an agricultural bioscience degree. And it's kind of from there I've just got more into kind of researching diseases and things. Went to do a master's at Aberystwyth Uni in Wales, and that was where I kind of started focusing a bit more on what I'm doing now. So yeah, that's kind of how I've got to here at the moment.
So yeah, good stuff. And that's sort of one of the cool things about the people we're having on is 2 weeks ago, Flavian had came from a family in an area where agriculture was done, but not necessarily coming from it. That's the case, and it's the case throughout farming. We have this sort of idea that we've all been growing up, our grandparents and our parents have farms, and we've just sort of moved in that way, but it's not the case, and there's so many ways in. So what did your undergraduate degree there, Jess, and your postgraduate degrees involve?
They were, well, with an undergraduate degree, to be honest, actually with both, they were pretty split half and half, with kind of studying things to do with animals, like livestock husbandry, and science around that, and then plant science as well. So at the start, I didn't really like all of the plant stuff at first. I really hated it, as you know, and I didn't do very well in it. So in my second year, I actually went to the Edinburgh campus, the SRUC Edinburgh, to study animal science. But for me, I found that I kind of wanted to come back to the half and half split of livestock and plant science, because I thought they kind of came quite well together.
Same at masters as well, or just sort of focusing into it was livestock science you studied at masters, wasn't it? So I guess there was less plant stuff in there, or was there any?
There was one class, but it kind of worked out maybe like a kind of 30-70 split, where more livestock. Right. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of us as a lecturer, I see it myself in students, and I saw it with you and I when we were both students. We go into a course and we've got this sort of background in livestock or animals, in your case at the time, and you're like, plants, why are they important? But it's all intertwined sort of thing, and yeah, once you can sort of realise the importance of plant science and animal science, then they come pretty much hand in hand. And for any listeners that are sort of watching or listening, I assume if you're listeners, you're listening. If you ever do come into a position where you're learning about animal science or agriculture or whatever, try and get the bigger picture of everything. I know, I'm sure Jess won't mind me saying her dad will often tell her she doesn't consider the big picture. And,
totally.
I think I've heard him say it more than I've heard him say his own name, but it's very true, and I've taken it on myself. And if you are looking at getting into animal science, just always consider that to feed those animals we do require plant-based products as well.
Totally.
So after your Masters, Jess, you'd been down... Well, actually, tell you what, before we go after your Masters, what made you choose... I don't actually know if you've said yet where you did your Masters, but you'd been in Scotland up until your Masters. What made you choose to go elsewhere? And where did you go?
I think I said, but I'll say again. So I went to Aberystwyth Uni, which is in bang smack in the middle of Wales, 2 hours from any other civilization. I decided to go there because my dad actually did his undergraduate degree there many, many years ago. And funnily enough, some of the lecturers I had actually taught him as well. So that was kind of part of the reason, because he knew how good a university it was. And also for me, I did want to do a Masters, but I didn't really know. I wasn't as I said, I wanted to study something to do with diseases, but I wasn't exactly sure yet. And I thought it'd be good to do a Masters degree that's a bit broad, but I can specify in things. So that's what made me choose the livestock science, because it was broad, but you were able to kind of specialise in certain things. And then obviously you've got a length of time to do your project, your honours project, which you really focus on something. So
yeah, good. And before I'll let you say the actual title of what you're doing at the minute, because I have learned it and I actually know how to say it correctly nowadays, but I'll leave it up to yourself. But before we get into that, it's dairy based what you're doing these days. Was dairy always your sort of intention, or had you anything else you wanted to look at before that?
No, dairy was not at all, and I'll hold my hands up and say there will be plenty of people that don't have any qualifications or haven't got a degree or masters or whatever that will know 10 times more about the dairy industry than me. That's not been my focus. But before that, I was really interested in sheep farming, because obviously working with yourself and your parents. So that was kind of something that I was quite interested in. And then also pig farming as well. I took a bit of a notion to go down that route. And I'd been following African swine fever virus at the time, like a couple of years ago. And then obviously I did my master's project on African swine fever virus. Learned so much about it. But what I actually wanted to do was learn about other pathogens as well, because as you said, my dad said I'm very specific, and I think if I had found a PhD in African swine fever, I literally would have focused on nothing else for the rest of my life apart from that. And I thought I can't do that. So that's why I kind of branched out and saw that when this project came up, this PhD one, I thought this is perfect because it's different animals and a different pathogen as well. So
Yeah, a big jump, a sort of step into unknown almost then. And it's true, you said you got quite a bit of experience at our farm, and when you were there, I was always sort of trying to teach you what was happening farming wise, and you were looking into diseases and whatnot, and I'm like, yeah. And you really question it. So I guess sort of disease modelling in a sense and epidemiology is sort of related in different animals. So what is your PhD? What's the project you're currently doing, and what sort of position are you in?
Okay, so the title of the PhD is The Epidemiology of Mycoplasma bovis in Scottish Dairy Herds. So I'll break that down because it's a lot of big words that are just a bit make no sense. So epidemiology is the study of the occurrence and patterns of disease in populations. And Mycoplasma bovis is the pathogen that I'm looking at. It causes chronic pneumonia and mastitis in dairy cattle, along with other symptoms. It spreads in milk, semen, direct contact. It survives in the environment for long periods of time, and we can't treat it very easily because it's resistant to the most commonly used antimicrobials or antibiotics anyways, like penicillin. That's ineffective. So, and we don't really know much about this bacteria, so that's why we're looking at it. So basically, a kind of overview of the project is that at the moment we have got 180 to 190 dairy farms throughout the country signed up, and they are sending us bulk tank milk samples. So for those of you who don't know, when in the parlour, when all the milk is collected into a bulk tank, so that's what the farmers are sampling from. They're sending it to us, and we are testing it for the presence of the Mycoplasma bovis to see if there is an infection at the moment, and also for antibodies, which would suggest that there might not be an infection at the moment, but there's been a recent infection because they're still shedding the antibodies, because they're still getting rid of the infection. So that's the stage we're at the moment.
And any findings yet, or no? Not allowed to say?
Not really allowed to say, no. It's very interesting though, and at the moment already we're able to see, we're kind of making observations already, and then it's helping to set the kind of stone for like the next stage as to what we're going to do, because we're hoping to go onto some farms as well, so that'll be when it gets really interesting.
Yeah, and you've kind of outlined a problem that, God, for other folk on, I think we've all talked about this being an issue, and who out of the almost 8 billion folk on the planet haven't felt this? Has COVID impacted things, or have you sort of seamlessly just kept going as normal?
I was held back for about 5 to 6 months. So if anyone reads The Scottish Farmer and sees and maybe follows like SRUC's social media pages, you would have seen that in February 2020, kind of February to March, we were releasing loads of stuff. Like we had a press release, I wrote an article for The Scottish Farmer. We were just like trying to promote the project, because that was a big part of it, was we wanted to make farmers aware so they could sign up. And you know, we put all this effort in, and then all of a sudden, bang, lockdown. So yeah, we had to put it on hold for the 6 months, but we've been so lucky that the majority of the farms that we signed up at the start of the year, by August, they were so keen to get going again, so it was really, really good. And then also we've picked up a huge like chunk more dairy farms as well for the study, so it did impact it, but we've just got to move on from it, and we're chugging along nicely. Will
that push back your sort of end date, or will that not? You don't really know.
I don't really know actually, yeah. But this is something that we've actually, funnily enough, had a conversation with my supervisors maybe 4 days ago or something. So yeah, we'll find out nearer the time, but hopefully not, because it would be nice not to have to add on another few months to the study.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as much as you're enjoying it, obviously, you know. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the guys listening, whether you're from farming, research, or not at all, and just you've came across this podcast. One, I don't know how. Great, I'm glad you're here. Is number 2, and before Jess really started talking about PhDs and whatnot, personally, all I really knew about them was Sheldon Cooper and Leonard Hofstadter, and it's always seen as this big thing, and I always saw doctorates and PhDs as, you know, oh my god, and I think I still do, like there's so much involved in them, but what actually is involved in them?
So it does differ with the kind of discipline you're in. So I'm going to speak for science ones, because I'm not sure at all about kind of arts and humanities, so they could differ completely. You have a period of time, generally kind of 3 years onwards. So for me, I'm 3.5 years, and you have a kind of overall theme or question that you're trying to answer. So again, I'll use my project as an example to explain this. So we're looking at Mycoplasma bovis and how it behaves in dairy herds. But then within that, you have a series of questions and studies that you want to do, and that will differ with sometimes some projects will have maybe 2 or 3 studies, some can have even more. And you're just trying to answer the questions. You have to submit a thesis, which it differs on the discipline, and also like different universities I think have different word counts, but I mean for me I think it's like 60 to 80,000 words, and then you've also got to produce some scientific papers as well, which will go out into the world for people to criticise and reference, hopefully.
So those papers that go out, is it part of, I don't want to say part of your grading, but is it also, do those papers that go out, or that thesis you produce, does that have to be tried and tested by sort of other academics, or have they got to question it? Have you got to defend it? How does that work?
Yeah, so your thesis is, I probably should, but like I'll do this at some point nearer the time when I've actually got to focus on all this. But like you do have people that do go over everything. They go over the whole thesis, and I think they're the same people that will also do your Viva, which is you have to go into a room, or during COVID online, and you can be there, I think it can be like 3-4 hours, and you've got to defend your thesis. You'll get asked loads of questions about what you've done, why you chose to do different protocols, and I'm trying to think, like, the literature that you know as well. It's like, really intense to make sure that you're basically worthy of being able to put PhD at the end of your name. So yeah, it's quite a big thing.
I can assume there's quite a few folk out there. A few of us have been sort of through degrees and whatnot, and personally I quite enjoyed the chats of presentations and Vivas and whatnot, but I'm really realising that my Viva was somewhat mini. So if you've got the date for your Viva, and you're going to be talking and defending for 3 and 4 hours, what's going through your head? How do you prepare for that sort of thing? Is that a wing it type deal and sort of know it well, or are you spending weeks preparing for that?
Yeah, I think you're advised to prepare for weeks. Like at the University of Glasgow, there is a course called the Viva Survivor. So they are like, it's very important. So I think if you go in winging it, unless you're one of those people that wings everything and just knows everything, you'll be fine. But yeah, the advice I've been given is, prepare and prepare and prepare again, and you probably still won't be prepared enough, but you'll get there.
Yeah, and it's. I think I'm just thinking about the length of your PhD thesis there. First off, I guess I've got 2 parts to this question. Is it structured the same way as a dissertation? So sort of you're going through methodologies, aims, objectives, literature reviews, that sort of thing, and then your actual research, obviously. Or is there more to it? Or what's the comparison there?
This is again actually a question that I had with my supervisors this week, and also with 2 fellow PhD students that I spoke to yesterday. So the structure will depend on your discipline, on the school you're with. So for example, like I'm at Glasgow University, but I'm with the MVLS, the Medicine, Veterinary and Life Sciences. It also depends on your supervisors as well. So they might want a certain way. So there's different ways that you can do it. You can have, and I think this is kind of going on to a different, kind of down a different route, but there's a thesis by publication, and I think that's different again, where you actually have to publish papers to get the thesis. So there's that, but that's different to like what I'm planning to do is you have multiple chapters. And instead of with a dissertation, you, as you say, you have like your literature review, methodology, results discussion. You may have chapter 1 is a literature review. Chapter 2 could be an entire study, all in one. But then you can break it down even more. It can be so different. So like I'm hoping that 2 of my, at the moment I've got kind of 2 studies in mind, or 2 papers, should I say, for the study that I'm doing at the moment. and they will be chapters in themselves. But the methods for them will be potentially the same chapter. So it's very different. It just depends what works best for what you're doing. I think that's the main thing. What flows better. Some people can group things together, others split it all up, and it's very confusing.
Yeah, and I've actually, I mean, I didn't tell you this before, but when I put out that I was going to have you on the podcast, a few folk had some questions for about PhDs. So that's what some of these are.
Okay.
And none of them were about sort of your PhD in particular. That sounds terrible. But I didn't say what it was. They were about sort of just a PhD and what, because it is such a not an achievable thing, as yourself and many others have proven, but it's something that is at least 5 years away if you're just starting out. And you're talking about 60 and 80,000 words there. The sort of cramming dissertation is almost a trend. As a lecturer, I 100% do not advise any of you do it. I would say take months, not even weeks, months of preparation into your dissertation. Make sure, first off, you're doing it in something you enjoy as well. I'm sure that would be something you'd advise too, Jess, with what you're doing. But is the sort of desk-based study a thing in PhDs? Like, I know you're out and sampling and whatnot. Is it quote unquote possible to do that if you, in the time you can write 60,000 words? Is it possible to do that, or is there always that sort of practical research that you're carrying out?
It does depend on what your discipline is. Like, again, what do you mean, sorry, as in like?
Yeah, no, it's fine. So, like, I mean, you'll quite often hear someone will write their 10,000 word dissertation the night before, because the research they're doing, they can sort of do from looking at papers.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. No, I get what you mean. Yeah, it will actually depend what you're doing. Like, I couldn't cram all of this all into a short period of time. I've got, for me, it'll be a year's worth of a study that I've got to write up. So, like, you couldn't do it very quickly. But there are some desk-based ones, if you're doing like genomics and you're working with like the thousands and thousands and thousands of rows and rows of data, that you may be able to. It's not. I have heard of some people leaving things till the last minute, and it terrifies me. Even at like undergrad level, that stressed me out so much. People leaving it, like, how could you do that? You need to be ahead. And I am quite a last-minute person as well, but that's just something else. Yeah, no,
it's a question that I don't think I'd ever really asked you, and when I got it, I was like, oh, that's a cool one. I assume the answer is much like a dissertation, but a lot more extreme, that yes, may be possible, but 100% do not do it.
No, and I think the problem as well is, so for anyone watching this or listening that has done a dissertation, like, think about your literature review. For me, my literature reviews were pretty good, but they weren't a review of the literature. They were just, I found as many papers that were relevant and put them in and kind of tried to cover everything. With like a literature review and a thesis, you are actually reviewing the literature. So, I couldn't just, I'm trying to think of an example of something. So, like, a thing with Mycoplasma bovis is that it spreads in milk and colostrum fed from infected cows to calves. So I couldn't just pick one paper and say, someone et al. says that it spreads it. That's really bad English. I won't write like that in my thesis, but this person says that it spreads in the milk and colostrum. You have to really back it up and have, you can't just look at one paper that's on this area. And you've also got to discuss it. You can't just say, this person said this. It's more, you more discuss it and actually talk about it. You've got to show that you understand. That's the main thing. It's not just a case of showing that you can reference, showing that you kind of understand these papers and you know that they're relevant. You've got to fully understand, because at the end of the day, like, I remember, and like, within the first week or the second week, I had a meeting with my primary supervisor, and he said, by the end of this, you'll be an expert in the country on Mycoplasma bovis. And I was like, that's a lot of pressure. And he was like, oh, I know, but it's true. And that is the thing. After this, you will be an expert in that specific thing, albeit it is very specific, but you will be the expert in it. So yeah, like you have to show that in the thesis and in your viva when you're defending it.
Yeah, a lot of pressure on that part for sure.
Yep.
I guess I've got a few questions of not necessarily what's next, what can come next, but I just want to, we've sort of, it's on the epidemiology of Mycoplasma bovis and Scottish dairy hares. Just wanted to say it and show that I can talk to people. We haven't really talked about it. You said what it is very briefly, but could you give us an in-depth thing of it? First off, I think a lot of people, when we listen to something we don't know much about, we want to know the serious things. Can it kill animals? Stuff like that, and just give us some information on that. Who does it target? Does it target calves or bulls or cows, or what sort of thing are we looking at?
Okay, so I'll point out, because I'll probably end up repeating myself saying this, we don't know an awful lot about Mycoplasma bovis, so I'll probably repeat myself for that. So it causes chronic pneumonia in calves. It can be really nasty, and it can kill calves, and it can generally also make them, they just don't really grow. Like, you can kind of pick out a calf that, if you look in a group, you can usually see the ones that probably have Mycoplasma bovis, because they just look miserable. It can also cause middle ear disease, so that means that they end up kind of with like an ear droop, 1 or 2 ears droop, or a head tilt as well. With the cows, they can develop mastitis. So this is just your typical mastitis. The udders are swollen, red, pus coming out of them, tender and things. And usually cows will need to be culled, because if it doesn't get any better. Also, God, I just need to reel it off. I should have it in my head. All ages of cattle can develop synovitis and arthritis, which is inflammation of the joints and the synovial fluid around the joints. So this will cause lameness. I don't think this tends to really generally kill them, but this will, usually this is a kind of secondary thing that happens, as well as either the pneumonia for the calves or the mastitis in the cows. And less common symptoms are keratoconjunctivitis, which is eye disease basically, and it can make them blind. And also reproductive disease, so it can cause infertility and abortions too. But I'll also point out one thing that we don't fully understand is the fact that some animals will become asymptomatic carriers. So these animals show no symptoms, and they basically harbour the pathogen and infect the rest of the herd. So they don't suffer at all, but they'll spread it to all the other animals, and this makes it really hard because they're basically a constant source. On top of that, you have some animals will intermittently shed the pathogen. So what I mean by this is, when you're infected, for example, I'll relate this to COVID. So when you're going for your COVID test, they're obviously looking to see if you're shedding the pathogen or antibodies or anything, and if they test you too early, then you're not going to be shedding it because you're not infected yet. So it's the same with pretty much every pathogen. So with the Mycoplasma bovis, though, you'll shed and then stop shedding, and then shed and then stop shedding. So if you get asymptomatic carriers and they're shedding intermittently, you can kind of see how you'll be testing the herd and you're maybe not finding the ones that are positive that are infecting the herd, if that makes sense. So then it can really become a problem. So yeah, and I'm trying to think what else. It generally tends to, once it's in the herd, it'll spread. It doesn't seem to spread too rapidly from what I understand anyways. And it spreads, there's quite a lot of spreading from the cows to the calves. So that's why it's really important for your kind of hygiene and husbandry and things to be really good. And it's also something that we're trying to look into more, because as I said before, we don't understand a lot of we don't fully understand how it spreads and how it actually behaves as well. So there's a lot of unknowns, but it's not a really deadly pathogen. But then again, we don't actually know much about it. And in New Zealand at the moment, they've got a whole I think, how much is it? $8 million or something like that is going towards eradicating Mycoplasma bovis because they've got a problem. But we don't really know how many herds in Scotland or in the UK. I probably should have pointed that out at the start. Actually, the whole reason for this project is that we don't actually know how many farms in Scotland have it. So, yeah.
So I guess take home from that is it can directly kill, but more leads to sort of like it creates an infection that leaves the animal suppressed, and it can then. Yeah,
it's more chronic, and with calves they will die because it's, if you like, I've seen some of the post-mortems of some of the lungs, and they're horrible. They are just filled with, you know, little kind of pus and stuff like that. It is really nasty for the calves.
And I just want to clear one thing up, but I do this if folk ever say words that I don't fully understand, just for the viewers as well. Asymptomatic, that means an animal that's not showing symptoms.
Yeah, not showing any symptoms, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And then symptomatic, I guess, the opposite, where it is showing, yeah. Cool. So what do you as the researcher, I mean, as a farmer and someone with an interest in animal welfare and just farmer welfare as well, I'm sure that the result you want to find is no Mycoplasma bovis. I'm sure that's not going to be the case, but as little as possible. But what do you as a researcher want to find? And if you find quote unquote nothing, is that bad?
So it's not actually. I'll use an example of this. So we're doing 2 tests on the milk. As I said, so one is to look for the actual presence of the Mycoplasma bovis itself, and one for the antibodies. So if we've found that, like, I can say, you know, there is presence of Mycoplasma bovis antibodies circulating, but the big concern is when one of the tests doesn't show anything. That can be good because you think, oh, there's no Mycoplasma bovis, but it could also be that the test isn't as, and I'm not going to go into too much science, but the sensitivity and specificity, which you may have heard thrown about in the news with COVID, which are related to the ability of these tests to detect true positives and true negatives. So if you had 100 cows or 100 individuals of whatever, and you're testing them, you want your sensitivity and specificity to be as high as possible, so that you're definitely going to detect true positives. So if this individual A is positive, you want that test to come out positive, and you want to reduce the number of times that, you know, an individual is positive and it comes out negative. So yeah, as much as we don't want to find anything, you know, if we don't find anything, that could also mean something is wrong with the test, and it's maybe we're needing to do more work on that. But yeah, it is circulating. Like, that's something I can say.
So, just a bit of a side question, I guess. What's worse? And before you answer, I want to have a guess. What's worse out of a false positive and a false negative? Is a false negative worse because you could miss something, whereas with a false positive, you're probably going to check again?
That's a good question, actually, and I feel like it's something I maybe should have came across, and I might say something wrong, so I'd don't quote me on this as like a science thing. Yeah. I would maybe say that. So yeah, probably a false positive is maybe better, because I suppose it's a bit like with TV, isn't it? When you're testing for reactors, yeah. You know, they get a second go. I suppose they get a second go if they're positive. Yeah, probably a false positive would be better. Ideally none, but yeah. But then I suppose as well, depending on what you're testing for. So as I said, with Mycoplasma bovis, you can't treat it. If you have a positive, you may not think it's a false positive, and the animal would be killed anyways. But that can
true actually.
Yeah. So it's kind of it's 50-50. You know, it just depends.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, really interesting, and I'm sure there's a lot of folk that are interested in science and are wanting to hear from people like yourself. And the plan for this podcast is I'm going to try and I'll offer it up to schools and whatnot if they want to hear where you can get it and whatnot. And I'm sure that they'd really like to hear that. But one more thing before the famous 2 questions that I ask everyone. I say famous, I make myself sound fancy. Before we get into that though, what you're doing this PhD at the minute. You've got another 18 months left, maybe even a bit more, somewhere in that 2-year ballpark. What's next? What can happen? Not necessarily what's your plan, but what can happen?
Quite a few different routes. I could go into, I think I'd be mad to be honest, but you can go into postdoc research, which is just continuing on. I don't think you get anything added on to your name, surely not, because I don't know what else they could do. So yeah, you can go to postdoc research, just research in general. I don't know if research after a PhD is always called postdoc research. I don't know, probably something I should know. Teaching at colleges and universities, and just more research. And then I suppose because when you do your PhD in your specific subject, you can continue researching that. So, like a postdoc will generally be in the area, that you're working on. So, don't know, I'd maybe continue looking at Mycoplasma bovis, or maybe be sick of it by the end of the years.
Well, I mean, you've kind of answered my next follow-up question, was going to be what's the difference between research and postdoc research. So after, what's that, maybe 23 years by then in education, you're still considering more? Are you mad?
Probably. I think, to be honest, the more I speak to people that have done PhDs or are currently doing them, we're all the same. We all just, you live and breathe your subject. You don't do anything else. And that's all you do, is you think about it, you talk to people about it, you find it hard to talk not about your PhD to people. So yeah, I think we're all a bit nuts.
Yeah, and as the boyfriend of a PhD student that we're currently talking to, even date nights and whatnot do involve the chats about Mycoplasma bovis, and I look down at my steak and think, you know what, it's enjoyable now. But no, I mean, we're talking about that. This is almost a date night for Jess and I, because we haven't seen each other in about almost a month now, so it's quite nice to talk, even though it is maybe not what you would normally talk about over dinner. Although, moving on, we always ask everyone 2 questions. First off, I'd just like to thank you for taking your evening and having a chat with us. This has been recorded about a month before it's actually going out. So maybe come the time it's out, if you have any questions for Jess, first off, feel free to fire them at me, and I'll pass them on to her, and maybe even pass Jess on to you, sort of thing, and you can have a chat without me being the confused middleman. And the reason I'm saying that is, a month down the line, things may have changed with the project. Things will be progressing at quite a rapid speed, I assume. But we've just talked about the sort of possibilities for progression from yourself, and you've sort of pinpointed your mad scientistness and the plans to continue. But where do you see? Well, it'll be Dr. Ireland-Hughes in 5 years.
I don't know. I really don't know. I think I'd definitely like to stay in the field of epidemiology. I'm really interested in the domestic animals and wildlife population interactions and disease spread there. So I don't know, maybe something like that. Yeah, that would be quite good. Maybe doing a bit of teaching. I don't know. I'd have to see if I'm good at it first. I've got my first trial of teaching this month, so we'll see. Maybe that'll be, by the time this is out, I'll probably not be wanting to teach. But yeah, I don't know.
You've actually just pointed something out there that I meant to cover earlier on. Have you been teaching at all with it or not?
Not yet, although, I've done one talk to some of the college students just about what I'm doing. And I've got 3 lectures coming up over the next months. But also as well, one thing that I'd quite like to point out quickly is, one thing with a PhD is you get lots of training as well, and some of it is mandatory and is on, how to be a researcher and things, but there's a lot of opportunities and training for public engagement as well. So you can get involved in science communication, which is so much fun, and I wish I'd done it sooner. And if it wasn't for COVID, I'd be doing a lot more, but obviously I can't at the moment. But that is one big thing that's that you can do. So
what's science and communication, just quickly?
Just a bit like what you're doing with the Rural to Kitchen, but with science. So stuff like promoting STEM, so science, technology, engineering and maths. it can be anything, like getting involved with groups. Like I'm in a Leaders in Science group at the moment, and we are helping high school students to achieve their Young STEM Leaders Award, and it's really good fun. So yeah, I think stuff like that is really good.
That's quite rewarding. I bet
yeah, it is.
Good. So, yep. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Not quite at the intentions of feet up in the Bahamas with a pina colada yet, but still not quite certain. And yeah, I mean, you'll still be in your 20s then, so I'm sure quite a lot going on at that stage. The only other thing I really ask folk, unless you've got any sort of burning questions, no beard comments, I get that from everyone, and enough from you off camera. What sort of, if you had any tips for anyone going into farming in general, and then also, or you don't have to talk about farming, research as well, and sort of agricultural science, what would they be?
Okay, so for farming first, it's knowing people, definitely, and it can be hard to get to know people at first. I even found, like, you know, obviously I was getting experience at your parents' farm, Wallace, and that was great, but going out to other farms that didn't have connections with you, it was really hard trying to say, you know, please, you know, let me come and have some experience. So like, I do empathise with people if you're trying to get into agriculture. It is tough, and I feel like you have to kind of prove yourself a bit more, but persevere and it'll be fine, and before you know it, you'll be in the industry, and it's great. With science and kind of getting more, if something like even any postgraduate study or research that you want to do, I would say go for it. I could probably go on about this this could be like a whole other talk. I'll try to summarise it. So to get into, if you want to study a PhD, the first thing I'd think of is, are you willing to dedicate the next few years to this? Because you're going to go mad, and it's a long time, and it is, as much as it's rewarding, it's also not going to be enjoyable if your heart isn't in it and you're not prepared. Kind of linked to that, pick a subject that you're really interested in. If you're not passionate about it, do not do a PhD in that specific field. Go into something else. Like, I'm very passionate about diseases and learning about them, which sounds a bit weird, you know, I love diseases, but like, I wouldn't be where I was if I wasn't as passionate about it. Finances as well, make sure that you are going to get this support that you need, because you get money from the university or whatever for doing the research, but in some cases you don't, and you might have to move away. Trying to think what else. And don't be afraid as well to branch out into a kind of field that you've never done before. So like, I had never really touched on epidemiology until my master's, and then I chose to do a project in infectious disease modelling, which I had never done before in my life. I didn't get the best grade out of it, but it gave me the experience, which I then could prove to my future potential supervisors that I am desperate to do this, and I'm willing to learn, and look how much I've learned, and then I obviously got it. So yeah, but I think that's the main things I would consider. If there's anything else, yeah, I can add it.
So I guess underlying ones are try hard and don't be scared to put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as someone who was talking to Jess quite often when she decided to jump to that modelling master's dissertation into the complete unknown, it did come with a bit of stress, I think would be fair to say.
A bit.
I was trying to be diplomatic.
No, it was really hard, but it was definitely worth it. Like, as I said, I wouldn't have got this PhD if I hadn't done it, because I had no knowledge of. I didn't have no knowledge. I had limited knowledge of the dairy industry compared to other potential candidates, and I didn't know anything about epidemiology. But this is the one thing I knew. So, yeah, like, as much as it is stressful, sometimes you just have to go for it. You know, I could have got a better grade with another project, but I chose to stress myself out for months.
Grand, good stuff. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say, Jess? Anything else not covered?
I don't think so, but if anyone has any questions about doing a master's, doing a PhD, even just anything about, well, maybe not anything about science, I'm not a fountain of knowledge on science, just, you know, it's something specific like this, or about getting into agriculture, I suppose, as well, then yeah, definitely fire questions to Wallace, because I didn't have anyone to ask before when I was trying to get into all this. So like if I can help one person, just ask away. Even if you think it's stupid, it probably isn't.
Yeah, and I think the probably isn't part's quite important. I mean, for anyone that knew me at college, at university, I was the one that never ever stopped asking questions, and I think a lot of my mates were maybe at a loss as to how I found so many questions. But as now a lecturer, you have no idea how much, one, that will benefit you. It'll benefit us as the lecturers, because we were probably bored at you not asking questions. And honestly, the most important part of it is the other people in, for example, we're talking about my class. I've just activated Siri somehow. The person in...
Could you try again?
2 seconds. The other people in the class, in the room, wherever you might be at the time, a convention, whatever, 99% of the time they're thinking it. So asking questions is so important, and I really couldn't put it over. You're saying the same thing, Jess. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, and hope you had a good time. Yep. Good. The only thing I'll say is, as I said at the start, if you're watching on YouTube, like, comment and subscribe is great. It really gets everyone involved, and share with your friends. Share the links on Facebook, Instagram. Try to get this podcast out there. We're getting sort of roughly, at least on average anyway, 150 folk watching each one on YouTube, and it's getting a bit bigger on Spotify as well. So keep that up. I appreciate that hugely. Doing this is great fun for me. I just get to talk to some really interesting folk. I don't know what's coming in 2 weeks, because it is currently still the start of February, and I'm pretty sure this is March 2nd, where you'll hear that, or 8th or some 12th, I think you'll see this. So yeah, thank you for coming along. Thank you to Jess for being here, and we will see you in 2 weeks.